Hey, it's Carly. I decided to try to film my labor and delivery story with Levi. It's been almost a year and a half now, so little things are beginning to fade, and I really want to document it before I can't with all the detail that I want to have. I really want to be able to look back on this when I do have future babies. We are planning on having more kids, and I just really want to be able to have this and have this story, and I want to share it for anybody out there who has a baby and wants to hear my story, or for someone who's going to have a baby and is trying to learn as much as they can. I know I was one of the latter. I started watching YouTube moms when I found out I was pregnant with Levi. And the first mom I actually started watching is Kelsey with Plus One Please. If you have not watched her channel, she's incredible. She's a wonderful woman, wonderful mom. I just love her. She was still pregnant with her son Nolan when I started watching. She was almost all the way through her pregnancy, though, by the time I did start watching. But and I've been following them ever since, and they're an adorable little family. And so I'm going to put a link to her channel below because I think she's just wonderful, and she is one of the people that inspired me to try to start doing this. And honestly, I do wish that I had started while I was pregnant and going through all of that, but I just didn't feel like I could. I'm not really sure why, but at the time I just felt like I just couldn't share it. I couldn't do that. So I am a little bit bummed that I didn't, so I'm kind of in retrospect trying to put some things on here so that I can remember it for the future. So without any further ado, here is my story. So if you wanted to hear the story about how we found out we got pregnant, I did do that story already, and I'll put that link below so that you can check that out. But this is actually just going to be story of labor and delivery. And it'll probably end up being in two parts because I talk a lot and it's going to take a little while. So I apologize in advance for the length, but I think most labor and delivery videos end up being in a couple of parts. So I am going to go ahead and get started. So we had moved when I was 8 months pregnant, so I was having to travel 3 hours back to Chico, where my doctor was, to have the baby. Well, I was having to go back for my doctor appointments, first of all. And I went my last doctor appointment, which I didn't know that well, I guess it would have been my last before my due date, but I didn't realize I was going to be going into labor that day. The appointment was on September 12th of 2012, and I was due on the 17th. And I did say September, right? I can't speak today. Maybe I shouldn't do this right now. So I went to my doctor appointment, and my mom and my sister came with me. My husband had to work. He had just gotten a new job, and he was only going to be able to take off a couple of days when the baby actually came. So we really didn't want to press our luck and have him take off any other time, because just in case we had the baby in the middle of the week, we wanted to be able to maximize the amount of time that he could be home with us. So my mom and my sister went with me. And I think my appointment was like at 11 or so in the morning. And so we went, and the previous week I had been 1 centimeter dilated. Like I said, I can't talk. What is my problem? And this week I was 2 centimeters dilated. And I was fairly effaced. I think I was like 60% effaced. See, these are the little details that I'm starting to lose. So I'm not 100% certain, but I feel like I was like 60% effaced. So or maybe it was 80%. Maybe, yeah, I think it was 80%, because that's why I decided to let him strip my membranes, because he asked me if I wanted him to do that, because he was going to be gone over the weekend and it was like right before my due date, and I was worried. I didn't want to have another doctor. So I called Steven and talked to him. He's like, hey, it's your decision. If you feel like you want to do that, go for it. So I did. And I said, just go ahead and do it. And he said, well, like 1/3 of the women who get their membranes stripped actually go into labor. And so, this isn't a guarantee that you will go into labor. And I was like, okay, that's fine. He said, if I do strip your membranes, you probably shouldn't go home just in case. And I was like, okay. So he did strip my membranes. And for anybody who doesn't know, it's when they like take their finger and like strip the actual membranes. He was like, it's going to be similar to like a vaginal exam. It just might be a little bit more uncomfortable. And he was right. It is a very similar like discomfort level, like getting like when you have pap smear is a very similar discomfort level, probably a little bit more uncomfortable than one. So yeah, but I mean, it only took a few seconds, so it wasn't like horrible. So I'm sorry, I'm completely blanking on what I was going to say next. Okay, so he stripped my membranes, so we decided to stay with my aunt that night. So me and my mom and my sister, we drove out to the venue where my brother and sister-in-law's wedding was going to be, and because they got married the next month. And we were like walking around the venue and kind of checking things out, and my mom was going to cater. So we were there for a couple of hours checking things out and working out details. So I started cramping like right when we showed up. And we were there for a couple of hours, and the cramping did start to get slowly more intense. And it was like more heavy, like period cramp type feeling. It definitely wasn't contractions. And so I didn't want to, I kind of kept updating Steven, but I didn't want to like tell him to come over because I wasn't even having contractions. So I didn't want him to show up and it be a false alarm. So we were there for a couple of hours and just kind of walked around and all of that. And I figured, that's good if I'm going to go into labor, maybe walking will kind of progress things. So then we went to my aunt's house and we had dinner. And by the time I started having dinner, which was like 6 or 6:30, I think, I did start to have some contractions. They were very irregular though. So again, I wanted to kind of wait until they became more regular to call Steven, just to be sure. I had never done this before, so I didn't want to call him and be a false alarm. And I hate to be wrong, which was totally silly because we should have called him a lot earlier than we did, which I will tell you. So after dinner, we went for a walk. My contractions did start to get stronger. They were still pretty irregular though. So again, constantly updating Steven, just not telling him to come yet. He's like, I will do what you want me to do. He's like, I'll come when you think that you actually are ready for me to come. So we went for a walk, and we walked for a little while. I can't remember exactly how long. And I decided I wanted to take a bath. So I went in and I took a bath, and my aunt has one of those really awesome, really deep tubs. So that was wonderful. And I stayed in the bathtub for like an hour. And my contractions did start to get more closer to being regular than they were. So I think this is really when I should have called Steven, about 9 o'clock. Because that's when my contractions actually became more regular. They might have been off by like 5 minutes one way or another, but they were like 15, 20 minutes apart at this point, I believe. But I was still did not want him to come if it wasn't going to happen, which obviously, and I didn't think to tell my mom or my aunt who have had kids that that's how my contractions were. Otherwise, I'm sure they would have insisted that we call Steven at that point. But hindsight's 20/20, and there you go. So I went up and I decided to go to bed early, and my poor cousin Daniel, he he was like, I don't want you to have the baby in my bed, because he was letting me and my mom stay in his room because he had more space in his room and a bigger bed for me to sleep on. And so he's like, please don't have the baby in my bed. I don't think I'll ever be able to sleep again. I just remember him saying that. It was so funny. I was like, I'm not going to have the baby in your bed, I promise. And he's like, okay, you better not. I went to sleep. So the contractions lessened just enough where I guess I could go to sleep. And I am a super, super heavy sleeper. I can sleep through just about anything. So I obviously wasn't aware of my contractions long enough to be able to sleep a good 30 to 45 minutes, I think. And my mom came in and she heard like my breath catch, and she was like, Carly? And I didn't respond because I was asleep. And she like waited, and then my breath caught again, and she was like, Carly? And I still didn't say anything. I was still asleep. So she got out her phone and timed and watched the time, and sure enough, 10 minutes later, my breath caught. And then she woke me up. She was like, Carly, your contractions are 10 minutes apart now. It's time for us to get ready and go to the hospital. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I don't know how I slept through. I mean, I know I sleep heavy, but I don't know how I slept through that, because once I did wake up, I was like, whoa, they're definitely there. So we called Steven, and by the time he was able to get gas in the car and throw his stuff together, and get on the road, it was like almost 11 o'clock. And it's a 3-hour drive to get there. And so then my mom and my sister and I, we packed up in my mom's car, and we drove the 30 minutes to the hospital. And from the time that my mom woke me up and my contractions were 10 minutes apart to the time that Steven left and we were loading up in the car to go, they went to 6 minutes apart. And then from the time that we left my aunt's house and got to the hospital, they went from 6 minutes apart to 3 minutes apart. So when I was walking into the hospital, my contractions were 3 minutes apart, and they were getting pretty intense. And I was starting to worry, and I was kicking myself for not calling Steven earlier. I can tell you that. And I was starting to get really worried because I knew he would be driving quickly to get to us. And I was really starting to get nervous and worried. I mean, unfortunately, my mom and my sister were wonderful, and they were really helpful and sweet, and they stayed with me until Steven got there. And so they got us set up in the room, and it wasn't the room that we ended up staying in. I don't even remember what exactly they were doing. I think they were monitoring the baby for a second while they were getting a room ready for me. And they were like, well, there's only one person allowed with you in the room. And I was like, well, can you please let them both stay? And they were like, fine, I guess they can both stay. So they let my mom and my sister stay, which I was very thankful for. And I was like, they're both going to leave when my husband gets here. Can you please just let him stay with me until he gets here? And so they were reluctant, but they let them both stay with me until Steven showed up. And so they monitored the baby. Levi was doing really, really well. I was doing well. I asked them to wait to put me on an IV or anything like that, because I was sick a lot as a kid and had to have a lot of blood drawn and IVs and stuff, and unless I absolutely have to have one, I do not want one. So they were really nice about that, and they let me kind of walk around a little bit without an IV for a while. And so I kind of went back and forth between walking, and then I would kind of sit on the bed for a little bit and get on all fours, and then I moved to a birthing ball, and I kind of would rock on the birthing ball and kind of lay my head in my arms and my arms on the bed, and that really helped. But I was really starting to get anxious at this point, because I just it just feels like such a long time when you're in labor. And then, of course, like, I was waiting for Steven to get there, and I was worried about him. And so I was really starting to get worked up, and I was trying to stay calm because I knew that that was important, but I was freaking out. And I don't remember a whole lot between the time that we actually kind of got situated in the room that I was laboring in and the time that Steven showed up, but I do remember enough to know that, like, he walked in the door and I vomited. Fortunately, I knew that I was getting nauseous, and so I told somebody and they got me a bucket. But so I feel, in hindsight, I do feel really bad for Steven that that's what he had to walk into, that he didn't get an opportunity to be with me and kind of transition with me into a more intense labor. He immediately walked into full-blown heavy labor. And so that, I think, was really hard for him to transition and to get into the mindset of, okay, this is happening. And so I do feel bad for him for that he had to see me vomit too. That was unfortunate. But hey, we're married and we have a baby together. There's a lot that we've seen now that, you know. So when he got there, I think he had gotten there in like 2.5 hours. So he definitely was speeding to get there. And he said that the roads were really empty though. So he was being really safe. He just drove quickly. So fortunately the roads were really empty, and I can tell you I was praying like crazy that he would get there safe. So when he got there, it was like 2:30. No, if he had gotten there, it was like 2 a.m. because he got to Chico in 2.5 hours. But by the time he got to the hospital, parked, got inside the hospital, found us, you know, when they let him in and all of that, it took until 2 o'clock. So, so when he got there, I was definitely in. I don't remember a whole lot after he showed up until I remember asking to get into a tub to labor because I really wanted to be in a bath. Oh, and I guess I should have said before all of this, I wanted a natural labor as much as possible. I knew that stuff happens and that it was possible that I wouldn't be able to have that, but I wanted to, as much as possible, have a natural labor. So I had obviously communicated that to my doctor and the nurses and everything, so they were pretty good about letting me kind of just be and walk and kind of do what I needed to do. And I think right before Steven got there, they did ask me to sit long enough for them to monitor the baby just to make sure that he was doing good. And he was great, like, the whole time. There was no issues, and there were no issues. But I could not lay back. I could not lay on my back at all. And it was like the contractions were really hard to deal with regardless, but when laying on my back, they just became unbearable. So I was just like, you can monitor me if I don't have to lay back. Those are my stipulations. That's it. So, they were good. They let me sit up and stuff. And then, when Steven got there, after he got there, I asked to labor in the tub. And so he went with me, and they set me up in a tub, which was in a completely different room down the hall. And I'm so glad that he got there when he did, because, he was with me for maybe an hour or probably 2 hours, and then I went into transition. So in the tub, I went into transition, and it was like crazy painful. I just remember thinking, this cannot be real, and then having contraction on top of contraction on top of contraction. I was like, oh, I guess it is. So and I remember looking at his face and just thinking, this poor man, he is just like beside himself. He does not know what to do to help me. And I could tell he was freaked out. You know, he held it together. He was calm, cool, and collected, and he was my rock. But looking in his eyes, I could tell he was like, oh, what am I doing? So, But I am so thankful that he was there during that, because I don't know if I could have gotten through that without him. It was the most painful portion of my labor. And I do think that part of that is because I was laying in the tub, because the tub wasn't super deep. And it was really long, and I'm really short. So, that made it a lot harder. And the other part is we found out later that Levi was sunny side up. So I'm going to actually stop right here because I'm at 20 minutes, and I'm going to do like my transition and pushing and all of that in another video. So I'll post that next.